It's 3 in the morning, and I'm sitting in my car in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner. Not because I'm hungry. Because I can't go home yet. Because if I go home, I'll have to face the reality that's glowing on my phone screen right now. $25,000. That's what I made last year. $25,000 at 26 years old. 4 years after I dropped out of college because I couldn't afford tuition anymore. You know that feeling when you're scrolling through social media and everyone from high school is posting about their promotions, their apartments, their trips to Europe? And you're sitting there in your retail uniform, pretending you're living your best life? That was me. Every single day. I'd post a carefully filtered selfie with some inspirational caption, and behind the screen, I was drowning. $25,000 doesn't sound that bad until you realize that's barely $2,000 a month. Before taxes, before rent, before student loans on a degree I never finished. Let me paint you a picture of who I was. I was the girl who believed everything they told us in high school. Go to college, get a degree, get a good job, live happily ever after. So I went to college. I lasted 2 years before the money ran out and the debt piled up. I thought, okay, I'll take a break, work for a year, save up, go back. That was 4 years ago. The break became permanent. The retail job became my life. And the shame? The shame became my constant companion. Here's what nobody tells you about dropping out. It's not just about the money you didn't finish spending on education. It's about the identity you lose. Every job application that asks for your education level. Every family gathering where someone asks what you're doing with your life. Every moment you have to explain why you're still working retail when everyone else is climbing corporate ladders. You start to feel like you're wearing a scarlet letter. Except instead of an A for adultery, it's a D for dropout. I remember the exact moment it really hit me. I was at my manager's office, and she was explaining why I didn't get the assistant manager position. The position I'd been working toward for 18 months. The position that would have taken me from $12 an hour to maybe $15. She looked at me with this pitying expression and said the person they hired had their bachelor's degree. They had less experience than me. They'd been there 6 months. But they had that piece of paper, and I didn't. Sound familiar? That suffocating feeling that your entire life has been decided by one choice you made when you were 19? That no matter how hard you work, how many extra shifts you pick up, how much you try to prove yourself, there's always going to be someone with a degree who gets picked over you. I was trapped. Completely and utterly trapped in a $25,000 prison, and I couldn't see any way out. The worst part wasn't even the money. It was the hopelessness. I'd lie awake at 3 in the morning, doing the math over and over. If I went back to school, that's 4 more years and maybe $60,000 in additional debt. If I stayed in retail, I'd be making basically the same money at 35 that I was making at 26. Every path forward looked like a dead end. Every option felt impossible. I was paralyzed by the certainty that I'd already ruined my life before it had really started. My parents didn't understand. How could they? They got their degrees when college cost the same as a used car. My dad would say things like, "Just work hard and show them what you're worth." My mom kept suggesting I go back to school like it was as simple as deciding to go to the gym. They meant well, but their advice felt like it came from another planet. A planet where hard work actually mattered more than credentials. A planet where someone without a degree could actually build a real career. I started avoiding my friends. The ones who'd graduated were all moving into their careers, getting apartments, talking about retirement accounts and health insurance that actually covered things. And I was still living with roommates in a place where the heater barely worked, eating ramen more nights than I care to admit, pretending I was choosing this lifestyle. Pretending I was taking time to figure out what I really wanted. The truth? I was terrified. Terrified that this was it. That $25,000 a year was my ceiling. That I'd missed my shot at a real life because I couldn't afford to finish college. That night in my car, staring at that number on my phone. Something inside me cracked. Not broke, cracked. Like when a dam starts to give way and you can see the water beginning to seep through. I was so tired of being ashamed. So tired of feeling like a failure. So tired of watching everyone else move forward while I stayed stuck. And somewhere in that exhaustion, in that 3 a.m. parking lot moment, a question started to form. A dangerous question. A question that would change everything. What if they were wrong? What if a degree wasn't the only way? What if I'd been looking for the wrong solution to the right problem this entire time? I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I went home and opened my laptop and started searching. Not for jobs, not for online degree programs. I searched for something different. I typed in, "How do people make money without college degrees?" And then, "Highest paying skills you can learn online." And then, "How to earn $70,000 with no degree." I went down a rabbit hole that lasted until sunrise, and what I found changed everything. Here's what nobody tells you when you're in high school, sitting in those guidance counselor meetings. They tell you about college degrees and trade schools. They show you charts about lifetime earnings with a bachelor's degree versus without one. But they never tell you about the third option. The option that didn't exist 20 years ago, but is everywhere now. Self-taught skills that companies desperately need and will pay stupid amounts of money for. Skills you can learn in months, not years. Skills that don't require permission from an institution to start using. I started making lists. Obsessive, detailed lists. I'd find someone online saying they made $60,000 as a freelance copywriter, and I'd write it down. Someone else making $55,000 as a data analyst with just certifications, not a degree. Video editors charging $200 an hour. Social media managers making $70,000. Every story I found, I documented. I was looking for patterns. I was looking for proof that the prison I was in had a door I just hadn't found yet. The breakthrough came around 6 in the morning. I was reading this blog post by someone who'd gone from bartender to six-figure consultant in 3 years, and she said something that made my stomach drop in the best possible way. She said, "Stop thinking about getting one skill. Start thinking about skill stacking." That's when it clicked. The people making real money weren't just good at one thing. They were good at 2 or 3 things that created a unique combination nobody else had. I started researching what skills actually stacked well together. Not random skills, strategic combinations that made you irreplaceable. And I kept seeing the same pattern emerge. Companies weren't just hiring writers anymore. They were hiring writers who understood data. They weren't just hiring video editors. They were hiring editors who could write scripts and understood marketing. The most valuable people weren't specialists. They were strategic generalists with 3 or 4 complementary skills that made them able to do things nobody else could. That's when I found my combination. Copywriting, data analysis, video editing. I know what you're thinking. That's random. But here's why it's not. Every company needs content now. Every company is trying to sell something online. And the people who can write compelling copy, prove it works with data, and then turn it into video content, those people are gold. Those people get paid. Those people don't need degrees because their work speaks louder than any credential ever could. I spent the next week just researching. Not learning yet, just researching. I found every free resource, every cheap course, every channel, every blog post about these 3 skills. I made spreadsheets. I created learning plans. I calculated how long it would realistically take to get good enough at each skill to start charging money. And here's what I figured out. If I treated this like a full-time job, I could learn the basics of all 3 skills in 6 months. Not master them, but get good enough to start building a portfolio and applying for jobs. My coworkers thought I'd lost my mind. I'd show up to my retail shifts with notebooks full of marketing copy I'd written at 2 in the morning. I'd take my lunch breaks watching tutorials on Google Analytics. I'd stay up until 3 analyzing why certain videos went viral. My roommate asked if I was okay. My parents worried I was having some kind of breakdown. And maybe I was. But it was the productive kind. The kind where you finally stop accepting your circumstances and start fighting back. Here's the really messed up part. I'd spent 4 years convinced I needed to go back to school. 4 years thinking the only path forward was accumulating more debt for a degree that might not even guarantee a job. And the answer was right there the whole time. On free websites, in $10 courses created by people who were actually doing the work, not just teaching theory. I'd been looking at a locked door when there was an open window 3 feet to my left. The desperation I'd felt in that parking lot started transforming into something else. Something that felt like hope mixed with rage. Hope that maybe I wasn't doomed to $25,000 forever. Rage that nobody had told me this option existed. That I'd wasted years believing the only way forward was impossible for me. That the entire system was designed to make people like me feel trapped when the skills companies actually needed could be learned by anyone with internet access and determination. I made a decision that morning. A decision that sounds crazy when I say it out loud, but made perfect sense to me then. I was going to spend the next 18 months learning these skills. I was going to treat it like my real job, even though my actual job was still folding clothes and dealing with rude customers. I was going to build a portfolio that proved I could do the work. And I was going to triple my income. Not someday, not if I got lucky. I was going to do it deliberately, strategically, and without anyone's permission. I was going to become the person companies couldn't afford not to hire. No degree required. 6 months into my self-education journey, I thought I was making progress. I was waking up at 5 in the morning to study before my shifts. I was spending every lunch break practicing copywriting formulas. I was staying up until midnight editing practice videos. I felt like I was finally doing something, like I was finally taking control. And then my manager called me into her office, and my entire world collapsed again. She was promoting someone to assistant manager. The position I'd been working toward for 18 months. The position that would have bumped me from $12 an hour to maybe $16. The position that represented the only upward movement possible in that job. I walked into that office thinking maybe, finally, this was my moment. Maybe all those extra shifts and perfect customer reviews were about to pay off. I was so naive it physically hurts to remember. Her name was Jessica. She'd been there 6 months. 6 months compared to my 4 years. She was nice enough, competent enough, but she had half my experience and a quarter of my product knowledge. And my manager sat there, hands folded on her desk, and explained with this apologetic smile that they'd decided to go with Jessica. When I asked why, she paused. That pause told me everything before she even opened her mouth. She said Jessica had her bachelor's degree in business administration, and that made her more qualified for a leadership position. You know that feeling when someone punches you in the stomach and all the air leaves your body? That's what it felt like. Sitting in that cramped office with its flickering fluorescent light and motivational posters about teamwork, being told that 4 years of my life meant less than a piece of paper someone else had. My manager kept talking, something about how I was valued and how there would be other opportunities. But I couldn't hear her anymore. All I could hear was the voice in my head screaming that I'd been right all along. That without a degree, I was always going to be passed over. That I'd wasted 6 months learning skills that didn't matter, because the system was rigged. I don't remember leaving that office. I don't remember finishing my shift. The next thing I remember clearly is sitting in a coffee shop 3 blocks away, laptop open, hands shaking, tears running down my face in this dirty, public place, while strangers pretended not to notice. I'd hit rock bottom before, or at least I thought I had. But this was different. This wasn't just despair. This was rage. This was the kind of anger that either destroys you or transforms you. And I didn't know which one it was going to be. I sat there for 2 hours, just staring at my screen. I'd opened my email to start looking at job applications, but I couldn't type. I kept thinking about Jessica with her business degree, learning on the job what I already knew. I kept thinking about all the classes she'd sat through about management theory that I'd learned through experience. I kept thinking about the $40,000 in debt she probably had, and how that debt had just bought her a $3 an hour raise while I got nothing. And then something shifted. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was hitting rock bottom so hard there was nowhere left to fall. But I realized something sitting in that coffee shop that changed everything. I'd been playing their game. I'd been trying to prove myself within a system that was designed to keep people like me at the bottom. I'd been working harder, being better, hoping someone would notice. But nobody was going to notice. Nobody was going to promote me. Nobody was going to save me. If I wanted out of this prison, I had to stop asking for permission and start taking what I needed. Here's the really messed up part. I wasn't a victim of bad luck. I wasn't a victim of not having a degree. I was a victim of my own mindset. I'd spent 6 months learning valuable skills, but I was still thinking like an employee, still waiting for someone to validate me, still believing I needed their approval before I could move forward. The system had trained me so well to stay in my place that even when I was building an escape route, I was still mentally locked in that cage. I pulled up my laptop and started writing. Not another practice piece, not another tutorial exercise. A real piece. A sales page for a fake product, written with everything I'd learned. Then I opened my video editing software and created a 30-second ad. Then I analyzed similar campaigns and wrote up what made them work. I built a mini portfolio right there in that coffee shop, running on spite and desperation and the crystal clear understanding that nobody was coming to rescue me. By the time the coffee shop closed at 9 p.m., I had a plan. Not a vague plan, not a someday plan. A specific, tactical plan that made my hands stop shaking and my breathing slow down. I was going to finish my portfolio in 2 weeks. I was going to apply to remote jobs that didn't care about degrees, only skills. I was going to position myself not as a retail worker trying to break in, but as a multi-skilled creative who could solve problems other people couldn't. And I was going to get out. Not someday. Now. I walked out of that coffee shop at 9:15 at night, and I felt different. Not hopeful, exactly. Hopeful felt too soft for what I was feeling. I felt dangerous. I felt like I'd spent years being polite, being patient, following the rules, and where had it gotten me? Nowhere. So I was done being polite. I was done waiting. I was done letting people with degrees but no skills tell me what I was worth. I was going to prove to myself and everyone else that their system was broken, and I didn't need their permission anymore. Let me tell you exactly how I went from $25,000 to $75,000 in 18 months. Not vague advice, not inspirational platitudes, the actual tactical roadmap I followed, the specific resources I used, the mistakes I made, and the negotiation strategies that multiplied my income. Because here's what I wish someone had told me. The learning part is actually the easy part. It's the positioning and negotiation that makes the difference between staying stuck and actually breaking through. I started with copywriting because it was the fastest skill to monetize. I found a 30-day copywriting course that cost $99. That was money I didn't have, so I picked up an extra shift and ate ramen for 2 weeks. The course taught me the fundamentals: how to write headlines that grab attention, how to structure persuasive arguments, how to use psychological triggers. But the real learning happened when I started writing 5 pieces of practice copy every single day. Product descriptions, email sequences, social media ads. I wrote for imaginary companies, real companies, any company I could think of. After 2 months of daily practice, I had a portfolio of 60 pieces. Most of them were terrible, but 10 of them were good enough to show potential clients. I created a simple one-page website using a free platform, put up my 10 best pieces, and started applying to remote copywriting jobs. Not the fancy agency jobs that required degrees, the small business jobs, the startup jobs, the companies desperate for someone who could write decent copy and wouldn't charge them $5,000 a project. My first paying client was a tiny e-commerce store selling handmade candles. They paid me $200 to write product descriptions for their entire catalog. $200 for work that took me 8 hours. That's $25 an hour, more than double what I was making at retail. I did that job so well, they referred me to 3 other small businesses. Within 3 months of starting copywriting, I was making an extra $1,000 a month on the side. That's when I knew this was real. That's when I knew I could actually do this. While I was building my copywriting income, I started learning data analysis. I enrolled in Google's free analytics certification. Every night after my copywriting work, I'd spend 2 hours learning how to read data, spot patterns, and translate numbers into actionable insights. I practiced on my own website analytics, on friends' business data, on any dataset I could find online. The key wasn't becoming a data scientist. It was becoming good enough to prove that my copywriting actually worked with numbers. 6 months in, I made my first big move. I applied for a remote marketing coordinator position at a software startup. They wanted someone who could write marketing copy and track campaign performance. The job posted said bachelor's degree required. I applied anyway. In my cover letter, I didn't apologize for not having a degree. I linked to my portfolio, showed them campaigns I'd written and the conversion data I'd tracked, and explained exactly how I'd increased their email open rates by 30% in 90 days. They hired me at $40,000. $40,000. I cried when I got that offer letter. That's not dramatic. I actually cried sitting at my laptop because I'd just nearly doubled my income in 6 months. But here's what I did next that most people don't do. I negotiated. I told them I appreciated the offer, but based on the value I could bring and the market rate for someone with my skill combination, I wanted $45,000. They came back at $42,000. I accepted. Just like that, I went from $25,000 to $42,000, from barely surviving to actually having breathing room. I spent 8 months in that role, and I was strategic about every single day. I didn't just do my job, I documented everything I did. Every campaign I ran, every metric I improved, every result I delivered. I was building evidence. I was creating proof of my value that had nothing to do with credentials and everything to do with results. Meanwhile, I was learning video editing at night. Free software, tutorials, practice projects for imaginary clients. I was building the third piece of my skill stack. The video editing took longer to learn than copywriting. It's more technical, more detail-oriented, more time-consuming. But I stayed consistent. 30 minutes every single night, no exceptions. After 4 months, I could edit a decent promotional video. After 6 months, I could do motion graphics and basic animation. I added video editing to my portfolio and started taking on small freelance video projects on weekends. Another $500 to $1,000 a month in side income. That's when I made my second big move. I saw a job posting for a content strategist at a marketing agency. They wanted someone who could write copy, analyze data, and create video content. It was basically my exact skill stack. The position paid $50,000 to $60,000. I applied with a portfolio that showed I could do all three things, not separately, but together. I showed them a campaign where I'd written the copy, tracked the conversion data, and created the promotional video. Nobody else applying had that combination. They offered me $55,000. This time, I negotiated harder. I told them I was currently at $42,000, but making another $12,000 in freelance work, so I was effectively at $54,000. I showed them the exact value I could bring: campaigns that converted, content that performed, and data to prove everything. I asked for $62,000. We settled at $58,000. Just like that, another $16,000 jump. I was at $58,000 15 months after that coffee shop moment. But I wasn't done. I worked that job for 3 months while building my freelance client base strategically. I wasn't just taking any project. I was taking projects that showcased my unique combination of skills. Projects where I could write the copy, analyze the performance, and create the video content. Projects that paid well because clients couldn't find anyone else who could do all three. And then I made my final move. I pitched my biggest freelance client on a retainer. $5,000 a month to be their dedicated content strategist. They said yes. 18 months after sitting in that coffee shop. $58,000 from my day job, plus $60,000 annually from my retainer client. That's $118,000 total. But to keep it conservative and account for taxes and inconsistency, I calculated my effective annual income at $75,000. I'd tripled my income. No degree, just strategy, skill stacking, and the willingness to negotiate like my life depended on it. Because it did. So here I am, 28 years old, making $75,000 a year. No college degree, no trust fund, no lucky break where some mentor discovered me and changed my life. Just me, my laptop, and 18 months of the most intense, uncomfortable, terrifying self-education I've ever experienced. And I need to tell you the truth about what that journey was actually like. Not the Instagram version, the real version. First, let me be brutally honest about what didn't work. I wasted probably 300 hours on skills that sounded impressive but didn't make me money. I started learning graphic design because I thought it would complement my other skills. 6 weeks in, I realized graphic design is saturated with talented people, and I wasn't good enough or passionate enough to compete. I tried learning coding because everyone says, learn to code. 2 months of tutorials later, I accepted that I hated it and moved on. The lesson? Not every skill is worth learning. Only learn skills that you can actually monetize and that you don't completely despise doing. Second truth. I failed constantly. My first 10 client pitches got rejected. My early copywriting was mediocre at best. My first 3 video editing projects were so bad I never showed them to anyone. I spent hours learning things the wrong way before finding the right way. The difference between me and the version of me stuck at $25,000? I didn't let failure stop me. I let it teach me. Every rejection was information. Every mistake was a lesson. Every terrible first draft was proof I was actually doing the work instead of just thinking about it. Here's what actually worked. Skill stacking wasn't about being excellent at 3 things. It was about being good enough at 3 complementary things that nobody else combined the same way. I'm not the best copywriter. I'm not the best data analyst. I'm not the best video editor. But I'm the only person many of my clients have met who can do all 3 competently and connect them strategically. That combination is what made me valuable. That combination is what tripled my income. Positioning was everything. I stopped applying to jobs as a retail worker trying to break into marketing. I started positioning myself as a content strategist who specialized in data-driven campaigns with video components. Same skills, different framing. One version says I'm trying to escape my circumstances. The other version says I'm bringing unique value. The second version gets hired at $60,000. The first version gets rejected before the interview. How you frame yourself matters more than almost anything else. Negotiation changed my life. If I'd accepted the first offer at every job, I'd be making $52,000 right now instead of $75,000. That's $23,000 in annual income I would have left on the table just by being too scared or too polite to ask for more. Here's what I learned. They expect you to negotiate. The first offer is never their best offer. And if you come prepared with data about your value and market rates, most companies will increase their offer. The worst they can say is no, and you're no worse off than before you asked. The resources I used were mostly free or cheap. Google's analytics certification was free. Tutorials for video editing were free. The copywriting course cost $99. I probably spent less than $500 total on my entire education. The expensive part wasn't the learning resources, it was the time. I sacrificed my social life for 18 months. I slept less. I worked more. I said no to things I wanted to do because I was building something bigger. That investment of time and focus was what actually cost me. Here's what they don't tell you about self-education. It's lonely. You're learning alone at 2 a.m. while everyone else is asleep. You're working on practice projects while your friends are out having fun. You're betting on yourself when nobody else believes in you yet. There's no classroom of peers, no professor to guide you, no structured curriculum to follow. You have to create your own structure. You have to motivate yourself. You have to be your own teacher, your own accountability partner, your own cheerleader. It's harder than traditional education in some ways because there's no external validation until you actually land that first client or job. But here's what they also don't tell you. It's faster. I went from zero marketing skills to gainful employment in 6 months. A traditional degree would have taken 4 years and cost me $80,000. I spent $500 and 18 months. The math isn't even close. And more importantly, I learned exactly what I needed to learn, not what some outdated curriculum decided was important. I learned skills that companies actually pay for right now, not theoretical knowledge that might be relevant someday. If you're sitting there right now feeling trapped by your lack of a degree, I need you to hear this. Your lack of credentials is not a life sentence. It's your starting point. Yes, some doors are closed to you, but other doors that didn't exist 20 years ago, are wide open. Companies need skills. They need results. They need people who can actually do the work. And increasingly, they care less about where you learned and more about what you can deliver. You don't need permission to start. You don't need to wait until you have enough money for college. You don't need to ask anyone if you're allowed to learn valuable skills and charge money for them. You just need to start. Pick 2 or 3 skills that stack well together. Find the free and cheap resources to learn them. Build a portfolio that proves you can do the work. Apply to jobs that care about skills over credentials. Negotiate like your life depends on it. And be patient enough to know this takes months, not days. But be impatient enough to start today. I'm not special. I'm not exceptionally talented. I don't have connections. I just refuse to accept that $25,000 a year was my ceiling. I refuse to believe that one choice I made at 19 determined the rest of my life. And I was willing to sacrifice 18 months of comfort to build a different future. That's it. That's the whole secret. Everything else is just tactical details and execution. If I can do this, you can do this. Your degree or lack of one doesn't define you. Your skills do. Your results do. Your refusal to stay stuck does. Now go build something.